Hey, deserving listeners, we have a special guest with us on the podcast today. Jesamie, welcome to the podcast again after 10 years or something since you were on the podcast last. Or wait, you've been on the podcast a number of times.
I think just 2.
Okay. You came on as a student after Family of Origin 10 years ago, and then you came to like the podcast parties that we would have where there'd be like a crowd of people and other kinds of things.
Yeah, I think just one of those. I had the first one with just Jamie and I, and then
right,
one of those things.
So welcome back to the podcast, Jesamie.
Thank you.
I just got done telling Bob. I haven't seen him in 3 months because of a number of. Usually we see each other every week or every 2 weeks, but he and I have just been, like out of town or busy or something. And so I finally got to see him. And in the course of the conversation, it came out that I pogoed off my head. He didn't hear about that. He didn't listen to the episode. So it just came up kind of randomly in conversation. So I was telling him about that. And then a part
He's
of
that. He's like, how you almost died. Like,
yeah, it was a part of the conversation. It was a meandering thing. But anyway, then as I'm telling him, I start thinking that Bob is starting to cry. And I'm thinking, he's not crying right now because we're not talking about something that would cause him to cry. Because I'm talking kind of jokingly about pogoing off my head. Well, then it becomes undeniable that he's crying, and I blurt out in the middle of the episode, "Are you crying?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Well, he says, "I don't want you to die." And I was like, "Oh no. No." And I'm like, "Well, good. Thank you for crying about that. That's a good thing to cry about. And also I don't, I was stupid and I don't want to die either. But it's nice of you to cry there, but I don't want to drag you down with my stupidity." And then that led me to talk on the podcast to tell Bob about how I got an email from you. And it was an out of the blue email in which you didn't, I don't think, refer to the pogoing off my head, but you were like, "Hey, I just wanted to tell you, even though I haven't talked with you in a couple of years or something, that you really impacted my life in a positive way as a mentor and as a teacher and a friend and supervisor and as a podcaster as well, because you listen to the podcast." And you laid out like 12 bullet points of like all the things that are along those lines. And it was very touching and it was a big deal. And I, those kinds of emails, I cherish truly, like, and I can relate because I've sent those emails like every 10 years. I'll like contact my football coach and I'll just be like, "Hey, I'm thinking of you and thanks." You know what I mean? That
does make me feel better because like it's like it's stuff that you want to say to people. Like I seriously thought that like, okay, before I die, or
I die.
These are things that I do want Kirk to know because like it did have this impact and just like this, and you are all about connection. I'm like, if I send something to you, you're going to receive it in a way that's like you're going to get it. Like I can imagine you sending stuff like that to your mentors and your coaches and stuff like that. So like, thank you for receiving it that way. I feel great that we had that interaction.
Yeah.
like how do you tell people like how they've impacted you without freaking them out? And I just didn't feel like I was going to freak you out.
No. Why would it freak someone out?
That's a good question. Maybe it just feels like it's going to freak somebody out because it's so vulnerable. Or maybe they'll think,
"Wait, am I dying?"
Well, I think that when we were in your class, people put you up on a pedestal, me included. And so it's like, I didn't ever want to make you feel weird. I don't know if you knew that.
No.
Yeah. Lots of us were like, Kirk. And I think throughout the years, like we really had to intentionally be like, this is vulnerable. Like had to intentionally be like, Kirk's a person, Kirk is fallible. And luckily you were honest with us about how you were. And that was really helpful. Like you let us see you as a human, but there was definitely some idol worship going on. And I never wanted it to feel weird because I also just wanted to like be a human and learn from you and not make you feel like you had a bunch of fans.
Yeah. Like worshipers and the burden that comes with it or something, or the embarrassment that comes with it. Yeah.
But when you're young, and I was really young when I started that program. And
how old were you?
I was right out of undergrad.
So like 22, 23?
Yeah, and to have all of the professors there be older than me, like so much older than me, and
Yeah.
really proficient, like...
Especially back then. Well, was I considered younger than the other professors by you? Or was I just considered one of the
I
old
had
people?
no idea how old you were. I thought you were younger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
You were like the
it's funny,
hit professor.
Well, I wonder if we talked about this back then, but I don't know if I knew it to this detail. But yeah, and it reminds me, because I'm not really around at Antioch that much anymore, and it also feels different over Zoom, teaching over Zoom, right? It feels it's worse, but I wonder if that felt sense of idol worship was more felt in person or something.
Did you feel it, or did you feel it throughout the years?
I would notice it, but I wouldn't feel it. I would hear about it, or it would crop up. Like, I remember, maybe even with you guys, I would disclose that I made a mistake or that I didn't know what I was doing, and at times, and people would really react well. They'd be like, "Oh my God, thank you so much for saying that, because I look up to you," and was really disheartened by how I felt so incompetent and how I'll never measure up to you or something. And I'd be like, "Oh, wow, what kind of vision do you have of me?" Like, because I feel like I'm a good therapist, but I've been doing it a long ass time. But at the same time, I don't know what I'm doing half the time, and certainly don't feel like I've got it all together. You know what I mean? And but at the same time, when you're, and I think any professor or teacher can attest to this, that when you're in that role, it depends on how you want to play it, but I think it can benefit the system and the people and the students if you kind of step into that a little bit and lead and provide that beacon to hold on to and to head towards, and so yeah, I would try to uphold that in a genuine way, but also to highlight, like, here's what you can be, and here's what I encourage you to strive for, or this version, of integrity, and not just dialing it in, not just barely understanding theory, but, really getting it and being very serious and understanding the weight of what we're doing. We're not just like listeners that are just nice people. Like, we're real clinicians that are doing real shit here. And
we're really trying to get in there.
Yeah. And it can be intimidating, but, I have to embody that at least someone is doing it. I'm not just saying it, I'm doing it. And so, and it's funny because you would have encountered me at a time when I was kind of rising in the ranks at Antioch as well, not only just to program director, but also it was a changing of the guard, because all those older professors, they all retired in the same 5-7 year period. And
yeah,
I went from being, the follower and the little puppy to suddenly being like the revered veteran, the one with the quote unquote institutional knowledge that would get thrown around. Well, Kirk, you have the institutional knowledge, so what's going on with administration? And I'd be like, oh shit, am I the only one that knows what's happening? Anyway, but so I'm telling Bob about the story of Pogo, and then, he starts crying, and then I'm like, oh, and then I was recalling this email I got from you, and the reason why I brought that up was, I was really absorbing the email and going like, oh wow, okay, I'm going to sit with this and thank Jesamie for saying this. And then I think, wait, did she just listen to the episode in which I pogoed off my head and then thought, oh shit, he's going to die before I tell him these 12 things? So I asked you, and I thought, even if it were true, I thought you would say something like, no, but then you were like, yep, that's exactly what happened. I listened to the pogoing off your head, and I thought, oh shit, if he dies before I tell you this. And so that's what prompted me to email. And I'm really glad you're honest about
now
that.
is the time.
It's running out.
Oh my God.
If he gets on a bike again, God knows what's going to happen.
Horrifying.
Yeah. So then we got to talking, and then we were like, hey, let's have you back on the podcast. And you wanted to talk about a particular topic, which is what?
I don't really know what to call it. I want to call it how I decided I didn't want to be a parent. There's like a whole movement now that's called like the Child Free by Choice movement. Have you heard of this?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and like
There's like a subreddit and stuff, I think.
there must be.
I think it's called Child Free, I think it's called.
Yeah. I'm just on like one of those like Facebook. It's like called a Respectfully Child Free, because I guess they can get pretty bashing of parents, which is not what I'm about at all. In fact, like throughout our conversation today, I really want it to, we'll get into it, but like I really wanted to come through that like I love parents. I respect parents. We need parents. I want to help parents. Like this has
some of my best friends are parents.
So like I know parents.
Well, but it's interesting. Let's talk about this for a second, because I think there are two sides. One is that I just remember when I was a youngster and people around me had various different levels of drug use. One of my good friends, argue a very, very close friend, and he was using drugs all the time and I wasn't. And there would be times when his drug use would come up or impact us or something. And some of his close friends would use drugs as much as him. And I'm not saying I didn't use drugs. I'm just saying just not to that level. And the thing that would happen sometimes is that he would go on the attack of me, even though I wasn't criticizing him. It would have been really swimming upstream to like have a stance against it. But just by me not doing it, I found was a threat to him. And he would go on the attack of me as a way to fight his own inner demons about whether or not he was on board with his thing. And, you know, with parenting, it has its pros and its cons.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pros. It's a very complicated, multifaceted, all-encompassing, glorious life. And there are times when it fucking sucks and you wish that you could just take a break. And especially if you have a real difficult kid or set of kids that's chronic, then over time, you know, it's not irrational for a parent to go like, did I make a mistake? Yeah. And so to have maybe particularly a woman say, I am choosing and I'm vocal and confident in my choice not to have kids, you're going to get some of that a displacement and projection towards you where they'll attack you just by you standing up and saying, I'm deciding not to have kids. And then, so I think there's that element. There's also just the element of just like, wait, we have a woman that's stepping out of the patriarchy. Like, how do we control her? So there's this attacking of that. But then I think there's also the other side of the coin is you have people that feel so oppressed by the system and by the patriarchy and by society that and by their own parents are just like, when are we going to see a kid? And it's just like, fuck you. And so you end up just getting, and then you start looking for all your justifications. Like, well, you have overcrowding, you have pollution, you have kids who, are being mistreated. And then you start having all this rhetoric around, well, breeders are the problem in society. You know what I mean? And so they can actually become oppressive themselves as a way of fighting back or something. And
I did consider myself for a very short time like anti-natalist, and I'm really embarrassed about it.
What is that position exactly?
Well, the way I took it was just like, no more kids. The world doesn't need more kids. Like, we don't need to replace ourselves. Humans are ruining the whole world. Like, let's just peter off. And like, I truly don't remember what softened my stance on that. I think, but what you're describing of like having to create reasons for not wanting this, I think really did lead me into a more extreme mindset for a while around this, when I don't think that if there would not have been so much pushback, I don't think I would need to have even stepped into those waters of antinatalism. And
so what was the progression? So I don't know if you want to get into the specifics, but like, what age were you when you started to think about not having? Do you want to talk about your background growing up?
Yes.
Like, okay. Because religion.
I literally have notes that say background, which starting us right in.
Okay. Because that all plays into this.
It does, yeah. So I was a really highly sensitive kiddo, pretty much right out of the womb, really like just highly anxious. And we just learned within the last like year or so, it's not an official diagnosis, but my mom has autism. Like it's pretty darn clear. And she raised me as a single mother. Like we had a quiet house, very low stimulation, like very peaceful, like
On purpose because of the sensitivities?
on purpose because of the sensitivity. She also suffered from like major depressive disorder. So she would be like kind of down for the count for days at a time in bed. She said I could say whatever I want. And so like I learned to be very self-sufficient as far as like, you know, just being an only child, getting lost in books. I like to crochet and like origami and like those were my jams.
But you also, from my memory, I don't know if you still do, like a lot of social chaos with your salsa dancing, which is, I've been to those salsa dancing clubs, the one on Westlake, down Lake Union. Like they would have a salsa night every Wednesday or something. It was really big in Seattle, and all the salsa people would come from all over the state really every week. And I, as someone who I can barely dance just regular American dude version without the upper biting of the lip. I certainly cannot salsa dance, but I've given it a try. I've taken some classes.
That's awesome.
But to be next to some of these guys while they're just like flipping the women around and making it just look so easy. But anyway, I've been in, and it's a very dense dance floor that has a bunch of people crammed in, and it can get real hot and sweaty. So, you know, you're not a wilting flower when it comes to chaos and action and aggravations and sweaty people getting in your business. You chose that lifestyle.
You chose this. I mean, I think I changed a lot as a person after going to undergrad. I had a really good experience at Western Washington University. I really came into my own there. But
like,
before,
that's when you blossomed and started to socialize
started
more.
doing leadership roles, started doing the dancing like that.
So was that a huge kind of liberation to be able to do something like that for you?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And for me, since I'm normally a follow on the dance floor, like I put blinders on and you have to just be so tuned in. So it's really like actually not very overstimulating, even though the environment around is very hectic and dancey. Like when I'm just attuning to my partner at the time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, and you were probably not in a follow role. You're probably in a lead role. You have a ton of stuff to think about. Like
I don't think I was following or leading. I think I was just kind of looking down at my feet and counting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if this matters, but you're not Hispanic.
I am.
You are?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. My grandpa, my great grandpa's from, oh my God, why can't I think of where my grandpa's from?
Somewhere south of the border.
For some reason, that's just going to fall out my brain. Yeah. I'm the tiniest bit Mexican.
Okay. Oh, you were trying to figure out where in Mexico he's from. Well, we got Mexico City, Monterrey.
It's near
Oaxaca,
nope,
Guadalajara.
That's my partner's. Oaxaca is where my partner's from.
Puerto Vallarta.
I feel so ridiculous. Like I
Veracruz.
know this. Let me just bring up Google Maps real fast. This is so embarrassing.
Tijuana, Rosarita, Baja, Cabo.
No, further up.
Further up?
No, it's really gonna like drive me nuts because.
Not Guadalajara.
No.
Okay.
I'm going south.
The Copper Canyon.
Chihuahua.
That's funny. I was like,
thank God.
Well, there's the state that's named after the dog.
That's it.
And I'm like, what's the name of that dog again? So, okay.
Yeah. I mean, but your face when you said that is like the correct face to make because I look Irish as they come.
Yeah.
So I get it.
Right.
Yeah.
Red head, fair skin.
Translucent skin. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know why that matters, but like just so the listeners can.
But I think
visualize,
you're saying like I chose this.
Right. It's an even.
I chose this life.
Yeah, and you're all kind of on the tall side too.
Yeah.
And you dress very noticeably. You're
like feminine.
Well, and you have a look. I don't know what you would call it. It's almost like a Leave It to Beaver. And I don't mean that in a bad way.
No, for sure. Like the very classic silhouettes or whatever.
Yeah, just real classic.
I look like I should be a mom
from the 50s.
50s.
Yeah. And so just to give people an idea of how much of a leap it is to go into that salsa floor, because you're going to be looked at as, at least, I don't know if people were unwelcoming, but they're gonna be like, okay, she's a different one that's arriving. Not that there weren't others like you, but I'm just saying, when I heard that you did salsa, and because I knew you before you told me, I was like, because I had been to that venue a few times, and I thought like, oh wow, that must be kind of a thing. And my impression of you, because that's when I met you, was I was like, wow, that's like impressive, because you were going every week,
Yeah, it was a big part of my life. I think I was compared to how I grew up, because I grew up evangelical Christian, right?
Right. So that's what I want to get into. I didn't know if you want to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I met you while you were still basically in it.
That's right. I was. Oh, so much has changed. At that time, I was married, I think, or about to be.
Mm-hmm. I knew your husband. Yeah.
It's so great. Anyway.
Nice guy.
He dropped me off.
Oh.
I always, he's still my best friend and everything.
That's really nice.
Sorry for the podcast. I've since divorced and moved out into a best friend situation. And he and I were from the get-go, very much like, we're not into having children. Like it was a discussion, but only like a thank God we don't have kids type of a thing.
So even among the evangelical, and there's different brands of evangelical, but so did you grow up in California evangelical? Because different regions will have different kinds of evangelicals is the point. Yeah,
we were kind of like hippie evangelical.
Okay. Northern
California, like not super conservative, although it definitely did have its pockets of that. But like, I grew up Assemblies of God, which is like, if you're traditional about it, like no dancing. And then
Isn't that one of the major cults of the world, Assembly of God?
Assemblies of God, not...
Or am I thinking of something different?
I think you might be thinking of something different. They've got their issues... Okay.
Is there a charismatic leader?
Yes. Okay. Who are we talking about here? It's Redding Bethel was our sister church, and they had who are the big music producer people?
I forget. But I did a whole episode about some other cult that had a name kind of like Assembly. But anyway, so this is just like a brand of evangelical, but hippie and open to a young woman making a decision not to have kids?
Well, okay. So I grew up, and I didn't really talk about kids at all. And I did grow up Baptist / Assemblies of God. And then I moved to Seattle and continued in Assemblies of God Church. And that's where I met my husband. That is where we kind of would get those questions of like, oh, so you guys are getting married. Are you thinking of having kids? Or when are you thinking of having children? It wasn't very pressury. It was just like well-meaning people. Like no one was going to judge us or at least not make it known that they were judging us if we said like, no, we don't want to have kids.
Was that like a particular congregation thing or a Seattle thing, or am I generalizing too much to evangelicals, that they would be more traditional or more threatened by a woman not being traditional in that way?
Not my congregations. So I do want to say that probably other congregations, but not the one that I was in.
Okay.
So like that big brick church when you're on the freeway that says like, has the big like lit up cross. Calvary Christian Assembly is what it's called. It's in the Roosevelt neighborhood.
The one right next to the freeway?
Yeah. That was it.
Oh, okay.
So they're kind of like, we love everybody and like everybody's welcome here and stuff.
Right. So Seattle progressive influenced.
Yeah. Influence, yeah.
Okay.
Not as progressive as they needed to be because they had like focus on the family. Anyway, that's a whole
Were there
other
open
story.
gay people in that's a good gauge of...
No.
Okay. So that puts them on the map in a certain place of progressiveness, Because you'll have like Catholic and Lutheran and I don't know if they're called evangelical, but, a lot of Christian churches in Seattle that are openly supportive of gay people and trans people.
Yeah. Or people that might not want to follow certain scripts.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think that was so far of the script for them, but there was like, but we live in the U.S. too, so like it might not even been just church specific, like we're a young couple, people were interested, but we didn't feel very pressured there. We just felt resolute. about our decision. And then
So let me drill down on that a little bit. So, because, for the listeners, they might be at these phases or they might have similar stories or influences. There's certain gates that we walk through, I suppose. And so when you met him up in Seattle. You moved up here to go to Western Washington University, which is north of Seattle and Bellingham. And how did you decide to go to Western, by the way? Why, of all the places?
Oh my God. I didn't get into UW. I applied and didn't make it.
Why'd you want to go to UW?
Since I was a little kid, I wanted to go to UW. It looked glamorous to me, and I wanted to be in Seattle.
Yeah. You grew up when it was cool to be from Seattle.
Yes.
Yeah.
As a child growing up I don't think I want to be specific about where I live because I live there again. But my small town, I always thought, Seattle, to me, that was big city. And, my dad lived up there and it just was that's
your dad lived up there?
My dad lived up there, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, I'm just going to try to get into UW. And then once I actually moved here, I did finish out a year of high school. So I had established residency here to be able to not be considered out of state to go to UW. But I just...
Which high school do you go to? I'm just curious.
Roosevelt,
yeah.
I think that's what it's called. Yeah, Roosevelt.
You forget what the name of the high school?
I forget a lot of things about my childhood.
Oh, really?
It's hard to remember things. I think I have a bad memory.
Okay. Were bad things happening?
I was just, like I said, I was just stressed out all the time. And I think your brain just doesn't hold stuff like that isn't, you just lose stuff.
Yeah. Well, Roosevelt High School is by your church, if that helps.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you are going to Western. Is that where you met your ex-husband?
No, I met Blake at church at Calvary Christian Assembly. I think it's what's called CCA. In my last year of high school, he was doing what is it called? The Running Start? Is that what it's called here?
Running Start.
So we weren't at the same place.
That's for people outside of the region or the country, where high school students can start taking college courses while they are taking high school courses, so they're double dipping essentially, and they can graduate early and get ahead of the game by as much as 2 years.
Yeah.
And you can start college essentially 2 years early. You can graduate from college 2 years early. And so when you met Blake, was that a part of the conversation, kids?
I don't think it was. I think there was just he had worked with a lot of kids, and so he was and he had siblings unlike me, so he kind of knew what it was like to be around kids, what the kid vibe was, and he didn't seem to be very he was never oh, I really want to be a dad. And to this day he maintains that. So I think just finances were a part of it, right? Being young, wanting to do cool stuff. And
to put in perspective, you're in your early 30s, and
yes,
so Blake would be as well now too.
Yes,
so
yeah.
Up until now, the decision still stands not to have kids.
Yeah.
But when did you know, ooh, I need to think about this, or I need to actually communicate with Blake about the future here?
It's kind of a two-part thing. I had to reevaluate this. And this kind of the reevaluation.
I just want to put an asterisk on this, that no one asks people that have kids, when did you make these decisions?
I know.
So I just want to highlight, but I think it's a worthy,
it's a good question for the people that are thinking of having kids.
When did you know? And for some people it might just be, I always knew, or something, or I had this revelation. So I don't want to otherize this scenario. Just want to say. I appreciate
that. Yeah. It's not something that causes a ton of oh, Kirk, you're othering me.
But it could come across that way. It's valid. Just why, if someone comes on and said they had kids, on some level, it just gets normalized to the point of why ask, which is a problem. But also, it is such a common traditional choice that people will make. It's not as foreign to people, and it gets talked about more often. People aren't scandalized by it, or they're not confused by it. And so but I think it bears exploration, just for the fact of exploring human experience.
Yeah.
But I just want I was just noticing like why are we focusing
How
on this
we were
again?
talking about it.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Well, then Blake and I opened our marriage, and I started meeting people that were better fits for me as far as like romantic choices. Like Blake and I have always been really solid platonically. And so we decided to get divorced, but throughout that time I had started dating someone who had kids, and this very strange thing started happening where every month at a certain point in my cycle, must have been ovulation, my body started basically begging me to have a child.
What did that feel like?
It felt like this deep sort of frantic longing, and I think it had to do with like wanting to be attached to this person. I think that was probably part of it, but there's definitely certainly something biological going on given the cyclical nature of it.
Would it manifest in intrusive thoughts about holding a baby, or what
Oh, okay. Not a lot of imagery, just a deep felt solar plexus longing. And like sometimes I would start crying because it's something that I felt like I wanted so much. But then I would continue
and you
through.
knew it was a longing for
a
for
baby.
you to be
Yeah.
pregnant and have a baby
With this specific person,
Okay.
who was like inspiring that. And there's probably a lot psychologically going on there. He was significantly older than me. Yeah, you probably know who we're talking about.
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah, and so there's probably some like wounded child stuff going on. I'm not trying to bash age gap relationships. I think they're fine. But for me and my history, it's just something I have to wonder about, you know?
So at that point, had you already decided not to have kids, or?
I had, and that's why it was so confusing.
So when did you decide to not have kids, like with Blake? And how did you
It was kind of just built in. Like it felt like just something we didn't want to do.
And because you would talk about it, the two of you.
We talk about it, but the way we would talk about it would be just like, oh, thank God we don't want that. It was never like, so do you want this? Okay. Yes, I do. No, I don't.
And you don't remember that moment where you took that leap and said that? It just sort of was quickly understood by the two of you.
Yes.
In conversation. Like the question would emerge or something, and the two of you would be like, well, we're not having kids anytime soon. Oh, no. Oh, okay, good. And then a little bit later, it's just like, we're probably not having kids ever, right? Yeah. Who wants those? Sticky, gross. And
actually, it from the get-go. It was like from the jump, it was always no.
We're never.
Yeah, which is odd, but we just never had that feeling of like, I want this. And it wasn't until after the part that I'll get into, that I was like, oh, now I'm having like real reasons and I'm really like digging into this. Yeah, for Blake and I, it was just sort of like, yeah, we're just not going to do this.
So when you're 19, it's not really a central question.
Yeah.
No one's really getting on you about it. It's not a social expectation in Seattle. And you're not really faced with having to wrestle with it at all. It's a private matter between you and Blake, and you're resolved and you're cool and there's no conflict, and so there's no real reason to kind of mull it over. And then later you open the relationship and become, would you say polyamorous, or?
Yes.
Okay, so you become polyamorous, you and Blake, at I don't know if you want to get into that, but that was your choice? Yeah,
so there were some, I don't have to get too deep into it, but there was some like, romantic incompatibilities, and this is not how I would suggest people like open their relationship. It worked for Blake and I, but this is not how I help people open their relationship. Just like do as I say, not as I do. But yeah, there was just some incompatibilities there, and so I started talking to him about like what would it look like for us to open the relationship and try to like make connections with other people. He never decided to. He just wasn't his thing. But I, at the time was very, very interested in making connections with people, and learned from my clients when I worked at Modern Therapy Seattle with Kate Stewart that like, oh, the way people are talking, like, oh, I am them. I am polyamorous too.
Modern Therapy Seattle focuses and advertises as a
sex positive
and poly, not just friendly, but a center for therapists that understand how to help people with the various phases of being polyamorous. And the owner, Kate Stewart herself, has published things on open relationships and knows about all that. So you're saying that as you were mulling over this, sounds like maybe an urge to explore other romances.
Yeah.
You're helping your clients with their various phases of polyamory, and you're thinking, and the way that they were talking about the philosophy and the mindset and the lifestyle, you're just thinking, wait, this fits like a glove for me.
Yeah. It just made so much sense. So like, and moving over into like relationship anarchy area, I was like, okay, there, like, I get why the monogamous script exists, and I think it's great, but also this is obviously something that needs to be examined, much like people having children or not. Like, just examine everything is kind of where I was with that. Mm-hmm. Okay, where were we? So I met this guy.
Yeah.
And he did have 3 children. So and
the kids were like, from my memory, like 7 to 12 or something.
Like 12 to like 18.
Oh.
When we first met, I think that's right, or 12 to 17.
Okay, so not that much younger than you.
No, yeah, not too far off.
You would have been 25, 26?
27.
Okay.
Yeah, 26, 27.
So, to a 17-year-old, you're an old lady, but for us 27-year-olds, we're like, well, it wasn't that long ago.
I was just there.
Yeah.
Like, this is... And it was fine. Like, I didn't meet the kiddos for a while. But yeah, this thing started happening. And I was like, I really have to take a look at this, because he had a vasectomy. And so he was like, but he was saying stuff like, I would have a child with a partner in the future. Like, I would. And so we had to think about it. And it was early in our relationship too. So I'm like, what is this? What is going on? It was mostly just mystifying to me, because as soon as, like I said, as soon as I would come down from the, ovulation phase, I would be like, what was that? Like, what is that? Why do I think that way? Like, who was that? So I bought this book, and it's called Motherhood. Is It For Me? Your Step-to-Step Guide to Clarity by Ann Davidman and Denise Carlini. And this was a great book. It's huge. It's huge, it's green, and they start you off with exercises, one of them being like making a genogram. And they're very much like, don't skip any of this, and don't do it around your partner, and don't talk about this with your partner. This has to be you. This is from my memory, so they might not have, probably weren't using these words.
I can see what do you think the wisdom is about that?
Just so it can be totally in tune with you.
Right. Because you don't want to be derailed by the complications of other people's rigidity or influence or something, like,
or even their perceived.
Not that you would just forge ahead without their influence, but you need a phase where you're just like, look, just think about it for yourself for a good amount of time before you start, interfacing and overlapping with others. Yeah.
And I liked that. I really did. But I had done so many of like the first couple of, let me look at these notes. What did I...
I'll do another asterisk here, that I've always just been fascinated with you in this way, that you have this strength of openness and willingness and adventure and self-interest in a healthy way to break from so many traditions and your own childhood, and your own religion. Because we haven't even talked about how the evangelicals considered your open relationship.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, I don't even know. That might have to be a separate conversation someday.
I saw your transition from afar to some extent, from just right down the middle evangelical to a more nuanced Christian. And I don't know, do you want to say where you're at now?
Yeah, I am agnostic.
Can I ask you some questions to kind of, because I love these kind of conversations.
Sure.
So do you believe in a God?
No.
Do you believe in a higher power?
No.
Do you pray to a God regardless?
Sometimes I shoot stuff up into the universe. Like, I just have gratefulness for something, and I'll I'm so used to praying inside my head that there is very much that dialogue, but I don't place it in any specific place. I kind of just let it diffuse into the ether.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe in an afterlife?
No.
Do you think there's a possibility of a God in an afterlife?
Yeah.
How likely?
Okay, so I just had a huge ego death because I took so many mushrooms.
Yeah.
And it really just felt like, yeah, we might not add this part, but just for, because I don't know.
Do you not want this in?
I don't really care. Like, I don't care if future clients or current clients or whatever. I don't think I care about that. I just don't want cops to like arrest me for taking illicit drugs.
Mushrooms?
Yeah.
I mean, we'll record all this and maybe I'll edit it out.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. Maybe we should just move away from it then.
I can't imagine it happening. I mean, I'm not an expert. I don't know anything about this.
They're going to show up to my door. They're going to knock and they're going to...
I don't think that, I don't think that's possible. In fact,
Great.
I bet you anything if you talk, I bet you anything if you talk to prosecutors, they would say, no, that's not what we're in the, if you're selling it on the street or you're part of a distribution.
Okay.
But if you talk publicly about taking mushrooms, one, it would be a PR nightmare because of all the people that, will
Do
recreationally take mushrooms or acid or MDMA or whatever. And two, like, what do we care if you, especially mushrooms, for crying out loud, like, you're not destroying the world by tripping out and having an ego death. So, I'm guessing, so if you want to leave it in, I think for people, there's a good amount of people that will have experiences like this or are interested in it. And there's, the whole psychedelic therapy angle of...
I think the people that know what I'm talking about or have had experiences might connect or might like be like, yeah, I kind of know where Jesamie might be coming from or something like that. So yeah, we can leave it in. I'm not planning.
And if you get arrested or prosecuted, I'll pay for half.
I'll let you know.
I'll pay for half of the legal fees. How about that?
Great. That's awesome. It's not going to happen. Okay. Thank you for going through that with me. I was like, because this is sort of pertinent to where I'm at. And I'm not like, psychedelics, like they're the answer now. It's like, they're great. They're a tool. You can use anything as a tool. But yeah, I did have this, I talk about it as like going up levels. And so at some point as I went up the levels in this trip, I didn't exist. And I sort of just gave into that and felt both like I was connected to everything, but also that nothing was really as tangible as it is as you go down the levels.
How long was that lasting for, do you think?
It was like 6 hours or something. Like that piece of it where I just like completely just didn't even exist.
Were you just sitting there staring into the darkness, or were you watching Ren and Stimpy, or what were you doing?
I think I was just like under the covers on my couch.
Were you with people, or?
Yeah, my current partner was kind of just sitting over there, but we weren't really interacting that much.
Uh-huh. Was it scary, or? It
could have been if I had held on too tightly. But
by letting go, you're like, okay.
By letting go is just like, yeah, like I think it could have gotten pretty scary if I would have gotten like a tug of war with consciousness or existence or ego, whatever those things are. But I didn't. I've listened to a lot of stuff about psychedelic trips and talked to a lot of people about them and just felt ready enough to go with the flow and see where it would take me.
Yeah, there's a lot of science about this around, or at least hypotheses about how the brain holds on to the idea that we are who we are. It seems like something that doesn't need to have neuronal attention to, but it does. And for some people, they'll have a stroke or a disorder that actually makes it so that you'll see symptoms of schizophrenia or something. But with these substances, it is hypothesized that it causes dysfunction in that ability and liberates the mind, I suppose, to be able to move past that barrier of I am me and the world is the world and I am separate or something.
That's
and
neat.
When you lose that function, it can be at the very least interesting and maybe quite profound. And that's what people will say is that, and that's what research shows, that the benefit of psychedelics with end of life, for example, is that it separates you or liberates you from the self, but also connects you with the universe and everyone in a way that makes death feel different.
Yes, I this is sort of faded sense, but I had this distinct thought that, because I grew up pretty passively suicidal too, just like I'm telling, like really tough to be in my side of my brain as a kid. That's since passed, but I had this thought that was like, I can't die. Like, obviously I could pass, but like almost like there's no such thing as death anymore. Like, yeah, I could have completed suicide or something like that all those times, but I would have just become like almost like just part of this endless being that just exists, and like you're part of the being, and all the fibers are, and like the whole universe. It's just so hard to talk about this stuff.
No, I mean,
I don't know how to find the words.
For people who have been through it, they're like, words can't describe it, and they understand. But even if you haven't been through it, it's not hard for me to understand. And for some, they might think it's just like stoner talk and people are crazy or something. But
probably is. I don't know.
But there's even some science around this that, I won't go down this road, but I've talked about it before, that the self is the self, but our narrative of the self is based on power structures in society and culture and stuff. And in America particularly, we tend to think of the self not only as an individual, but being contained within the brain,
Yeah.
And science demonstrates that's not a coherent narrative of the self. The self needs one's environment, one's social relationships, one's memories, one's perceptions, including the brain. The brain is very important in that system, but to have a psychedelic experience that elaborates on that, if you will, and gives you a real felt sense that extends a long period of time, it can really connect you potentially with that reality that we're not just contained as an individual entity in our brains.
Yeah. Yeah, what you said. So when you ask me, like, do I believe in a God or could there be a God? It's like, I think I'm going to sound super stoner here, but like, I believe whatever the mushrooms want me to believe. Like, I believe whatever, like, I believe in connection. I believe that on some level we might all be connected, whether that's just purely a magnetic connection that keeps all the planets suspended or whatever, or something more spiritual than that. But I think that's plausible.
Okay. So the belief is that whole thing.
That whole thing.
And wow, what a change since the day I met you.
I know. I remember telling you that I didn't believe in God, and I think you were sad for me or something. That was my impression. But I think the reason that I stopped believing was fast tracked by learning how transphobic and homophobic my church was, and having it like really break my heart, because they kind of had used words that indicated that they were not that way, but they were definitely really awful. I am not trying to be so mean to this church. I don't know what they are like now.
Hey.
I have no idea. This is just my experience. It broke my heart. I hated it.
If you're transphobic and homophobic, you get what you deserve.
Thank you. Yeah, it was so messed up. And so I just told Blake at the time, like, I just can't keep going. And then I just kept deconstructing pretty quickly. I would say within a year, I was like, I don't believe there's a God. Like, as soon as I was like, I don't think I believe there's a God, my fear of hell just vanished. And I was like, I've been living under that for my entire life. Oh my God. Like, no wonder I was such a scared little kid. I was always trying to be so good. Like, it was so hard, man.
Yeah.
And so then it just like was the switch that flipped. And I felt so free. Like nobody was watching me all the time. My brain got to be my own. And then my body got to be my own. And then so many things just got to belong to me that before never could. And that was powerful. So I think everybody has their own journey and everybody gets to live their life the way they do. But for me, resoundingly, I'm not going back to religion, and it's none of my business. Christy told me about the person who says like, it's above my pay grade or it's none of my business or whatever, like how the universe works. Has she ever mentioned that to you?
I don't remember.
Basically, there's like questions in this universe and we don't have answers and it's none of my business. And that's where I'm at right now.
Okay. So when you had this emerging agnosticism, atheism, if I might label it that,
sure,
you started to go down that road of, okay, now what? And I don't want to have kids and I don't want to live a monogamous life.
Yeah.
And maybe monogamy and the whole kids thing, it's all just part of the patriarchy, part of the problem, part of the oppression, part of the assumptions of tradition and what you're supposed to do. And I can see the matrix now. I'm looking around at everyone else, and I mean, you're making a face, but I think that
I feel like that would be presumptuous of me, but I am kind of presumptuous. Like, so fine. I do make a lot of presumptions.
Yeah, at the very least, it was I'm describing it in my words, but you entered a phase, and you were you're different now than you were in this phase, but it was a phase of antinatalist, which is a position of what exactly?
Where you just don't think anybody needs to have babies or maybe should not have babies.
Yeah. Advocacy for not having kids.
Not having kids, yeah.
And that can be communicated and advocated for and picketed for in various different ways.
If you wanted to, you could. I never would do that just because I always had this non-extreme part of my brain that was like, but I do respect parents and
So was it more of like a participation in the community and a wish for a different future, or
I think I just
a
got
position in your head that was quietly believed in?
That one. Okay. Yeah, I was like, I don't like where this world is going, or I don't think we take very good care of it.
Because you're not an imposer of your ideas on other people.
I really hope not. I'm sure I do, but no,
you really
I really
don't.
Try not
You're
to.
You're one of the most non-that.
Excellent. It's working. Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't for like an in-group thing. I didn't get a lot of community. I didn't get any community from it. It was really just in my own head. And maybe I said something to my mom once and horrified her. But other than that.
Because she's still Christian?
She is, yeah. And she really wanted grandchildren.
So let's break down that, because I've explored this before, I think, but when a parent, and I guess even traditionally it's a lot of mothers, but really any parent is saying, when are we going to have grandkids?
Yeah.
Or I can't wait to have grandkids, or you should maybe, what is that?
I just asked one of my therapist friends, and the answer she gave me that seemed plausible was just, they want all the good feelings of being a parent with, and being adored by a child and, being able to have all that goodness in the connection without all the discipline and all of that goes on with it.
Themselves.
For themselves.
Yeah.
And because I asked her, she's also child-free by choice, and mentioned that her mom had a similar struggle as my mom around not becoming a grandparent. And I was so confused because as someone who's never really wanted kids except for those little blips in my cycle, I was truly curious. So I wanted to ask my mom more about that, but I just didn't have time before this.
What are some other reasons, do you think? Because some people that are not your parents, like friends or just coworkers, will have similar kinds of messages.
Hopes or wishes for... Well, I imagine that for my friends that have children would want the shared experience.
So
that might be
you
one.
could both support each other in your child experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that. I've never had that pressure from any of my friends that have chosen to have children. I don't know. What do you think? I'm still kind of confused.
I think those are all factors, and everyone's going to have different weights on each one. Also, just like I said, the patriarchy is just needing to control women, and one of the ways that it's harder to detect this in like mainstream Seattle culture. It's there, but it's much easier to detect in some of the cultish Christian religions that I'll study for the podcast, like the Duggars and
they are on a mission.
Yeah, sister wives, fundamentalist Christians, fundamentalist evangelicals, fundamentalist Mormons.
Yeah.
That to have a system that is prescriptive of women to have as many kids as possible, and to set up all of these measures that the wives can't refuse the men, that it is the highest calling to have as many kids as possible. Like, it's one thing to dictate to have kids. It's another thing to say that you have to basically be pregnant all the time and you have no choice.
You kind of have
there's some versions where you kind of have a choice, but you'll be frowned on. At the very least, look at the people we're celebrating is like 20 kids, and then it becomes more obvious that it upholds the hierarchy. We could say it's nefarious, but you could also just say that it just keeps the social order. That if you have everyone slot into their roles and everything's expected, and the rules of those roles keep people in the roles. And there are good aspects to the roles, but there are a lot of limitations, obviously. But it keeps it very secure, so that the power structure can predict the future and know that they're going to be in power later on. If you have half of your congregation in a constant struggle of kids and childbearing, they don't have time to think about the social order. And if you have the men constantly thinking about how do they make sure that their woman stays in her lane, then he doesn't have the chance to look at his superiors in the organization and go like, wait, what's happening right now? So, and those to a lesser extent. So, patriarchy, but also just like tradition, and like what I was talking about, my friend who used drugs all the time and was just threatened by, because it's just a scary thing to think like, wait, did I make a mistake, or am I making a mistake?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I feel so bad for people that are on like the regretful parents subreddit or whatever. People are finally getting places to talk about this stuff. And I think that has been really, really important and healing, and even helpful for lots of people who are regretful parents to be better parents, or just reach some sort of like acceptance or understanding. That's what I've seen sometimes. And so I don't know if I'm just not good at speaking to that, because like I'm not a parent, I'm not a regretful.
Well, what do you want to say? Sounds like you want to say something. Like from your uninformed position of not having kids.
Position, like I just have so much empathy. Like I could not imagine having a child. I could not imagine. I mean, I can. I can only imagine how hard it is to not only just like birth a child, but like also whether you birth the child or not that you have, like just like raise a human being, like the amount of selflessness and like you just like don't get a choice. Like you have to show up for this kid because they deserve it and they need it and they're there and boom, that's it. Like,
and so for you, you're saying, I don't want that.
I don't want that.
And
I feel so bad for people that are like, oh my God, like I love my kid, but this is way harder than I thought. Yeah.
I've dipped into those conversations, or lurked as they call it on Reddit. And it breaks my heart that parents have valid and normal moments of regret sometimes for, I think, really understandable reasons, very easily relatable reasons, like their kid has a chronic issue or a really difficult behavioral issue.
Or they're just incompatible.
Well, right. So that one's harder to immediately relate to. Like they just for whatever reason, they just don't like their kid, or they're thinking, my kid's, from my understanding, pretty run of the mill, but I wish I would have really known or been asked or thought more about this prior to making the decision to have kids, because I think I'm one of those people that I'm just not cut out to be a parent. And it breaks my heart that these people have nowhere to turn. Like they can't even turn to their spouse. They can't turn to their parents. They can't turn to their friends. They can't turn to Facebook. They can't turn to their minister. They can't maybe even turn to their therapist.
Their therapist, yeah.
There's just no one to turn to. And if they did, they would be instantly labeled a cold-hearted bitch of astronomical proportions and abusive. CPS might get called literally. And,
jeez,
because that's, I think, mainstream for someone to stand up. I mean,
Chelsea Handler now is like, I mean, she's not a parent, but like people are being.
But that's the key, is if you're not a parent, then you're sort of allowed it. You're still stigmatized. I mean, Chelsea Handler gets a lot of shit from a lot of people.
Yeah.
But like, if you have, who do we know that has kids?
No, you're right.
But then the other side of the coin is, don't be public about that, because you do have a kid, and this kid is going to be very harmed if they even. It's one thing to have those thoughts, but keep it together, for God's sakes, because if the kid knows that you don't want them, that's like one of the most abusive ideas you could possibly like. So okay, yeah, I guess maybe get some support, but do not make it public. So there's that. Also, like, you should have thought it. Now, if you live in a society where they don't give you a choice, but if you're in any kind of mainstream American society, like, there's enough of a choice there. Like, one of the not that it's not oppressed, as we've been going over, but one of the stats that I remember hearing, and I can't remember the exact number, but that childless women, which is, not a great phrase, I suppose, but whatever.
It's what we got.
People without kids.
It's one of the ones we have.
People who decide not to have, that there's always been a sizable percentage of women that have never had kids. It's not a new thing. Mm-hmm. And there were roles, for these women in the past. They would be teachers often. One, because they weren't allowed to work in a office setting or a trade setting. But, there was an avenue that they could take, being in a nun or something, There were these roles that were understood, and it wasn't as pigeonholed or forced as we might imagine. Not that it was great back then, but the point is that the urge to not have kids has always been there, and it's always been a percentage of women that, and arguably, if they're not having kids 100 years ago, they must really not want to have kids, because the pressure would be even greater, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a new thing. You're not abnormal.
Yeah.
It's totally normal to have that life choice or not the urge to have kids overall. So you entered into a mindset that was more extreme than your current mindset, but you weren't really sharing it or participating in that conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I truly think it was just an overcorrection for feeling like I had to have good reasons. Like I just went to the end of the
Did you ever feel
spectrum.
like you had to justify yourself to anybody? Who?
Even though my mom wants grandchildren, I didn't really feel like I had to justify myself to her. It's just this idea is so strong. The patriarchy is so in my head that I have to, there's something soothing to me about like going over my reasons every once in a while, as if there was some perceived pressure coming at me specifically, which I do not believe there is. I don't think I've experienced that. If I have, I've forgotten it.
So you don't have friends or coworkers or something that are like why aren't you having kids? Or, you're getting older. You should, your eggs are drying up. You got to capitalize on it. Or men who are like,
I get some men, like when I was dating more, I would mention it. And it wouldn't be a long conversation though. It would just be like, oh, well, aren't you just gonna, like, who's gonna take care of you when you're older or something? Or like, and it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. You hear that sometimes. Who's gonna take, like, okay, so the one reason I'm gonna have kids is to have like a nurse when I'm older.
Yeah, that's the thing, man. If I did have kids, my standard for how they would need to be treated is like so high. And that does not cut it. Having kids so that I can use them as tools for my own survival.
Yeah. And, maybe 100 years ago, it was kind of a practical thing.
Sure. I'm sure it absolutely was. But I am so privileged. I have so many choices available to me.
The amount of money you save by not having kids, you can buy a fleet of nurses to take care of you when you're old.
A fleet. Look at them with their oars. A fleet. You know what I mean? I lost the train of thought. I lost where we were going with
that. Well, did you resolve the once a month? How did you resolve that?
I resolved it because I alone came to this point in the book where the exercise was just like, it was just journaling. It was just like sentences about like, how would people view this? How would your dad view this? How would your mom view this? What would they think? And all, like, something like that. And then
so it starts to introduce other people into the
and social, if I'm remembering correctly. But they said this one thing that really had my brain take off, and it was like, just keep writing. Don't judge anything that comes to your mind. Just like if you find that you like need to keep going on something, do it. So this really weird thing happened that's never happened before and has never happened since, where it was kind of like my brain was like, okay, like I will take you into this huge, very powerful, very vivid imagery. I was standing holding a very small baby.
You had this vision?
In my mind. Yeah, I guess it was a vision, if we want to call it a vision. Yeah. I had a vision, and I like felt this like nothing I've ever experienced in my real life, protectiveness for this being that I was holding. And I remember being like, I do not want this child's father to be anywhere near us. I want me to be the only influence on this child. Like, and it was coming from this place of like really deep love and protection. And it was wild. Like, I don't even know. I have no idea why that could have happened or where it came from. But
so it sounded pretty. It wasn't just like a fleeting thought. It sounds like a.
No, I was like sobbing by the end of it because it was so powerful. And so yeah, I had this whole imagery. I don't know how long it lasted, but I leaned into it, and it became more and more real. And kind of like I wasn't asking specific questions of the scenario, but I had questions that were present.
Like what?
Like the stuff about like whoever fathered this vision child and what their role was, and it was just like, no, stay the fuck away. Like it's like kind of like it's you and me. Mm-hmm. That's what it was. Yeah, it's you and me, kiddo, or something like that. And it was so precious, this being, to me, that like it couldn't have just been a fleeting thought. Like it really like stuck in my noggin. And I think I had stopped writing by this time because my brain like took over everything, and it's like as if I could see it, and like it was. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've never had a vision before, so I imagine this is what visions are like. Mm-hmm. And then I came out of it, and like I said, like it was very powerful for me. I was just crying, and throughout that coming down time, and no drugs were involved, by the way. I was not partaking this time. I was like, oh, my brain just was like, you're the kid. I was like, oh my God, okay. And it's in that moment that I knew like my purpose for me, between me and me, is to raise me. Like I've got a long way to go. I've got a lot of things I'm trying to figure out, but like I'm so sure now because of what happened during that vision that I'm definitely a parent. I'm a parent for me. And I had been doing tons and tons of work with my therapist, my long-term therapist, on like self-love and reparenting and moving through a lot of like the religion-based and just society-based like self-hate and all of that. So it was tracking with the work I was already doing.
What if someone said, well, the urge that you had when you were with your partner after Blake and this vision, you're denying your inner desire and need or spiritual destiny of having children?
Based on like the vision of me like actually literally holding a child or
Yeah,
something?
because, someone could say, or even yourself could have said, I have an inner motivation to have kids, but I just framed it and made an excuse that, oh, no, it's not a kid, it's me. And then that puts it in a box and I can deny it. What would you say to them?
I guess like what I would actually say to them is just like kind of nod and smile, like, like, okay, cool. Yeah. But what I would think to say if I didn't have manners would be just like, you're not in my head. You're not in my psyche. Like you don't know the things I have seen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I wouldn't really even feel the need to have to defend it, even though I could say those things I just said.
Mm-hmm.
It just,
so internally, you wouldn't feel threatened regarding the way that it is for you. And
no,
you wouldn't feel like it was exposing a crack in your life.
I've thought about it, but it just resonated so hard. Like when something's just like undeniable and you want to question it because you want to do your due diligence, but then at the end of the day, you're always you just know. You just have this knowing. Yeah.
So I want to introduce along those lines another couple questions or ideas. What?
Can we take a potty break?
Yeah, sure.
Ooh, okay.
But first, let's take a break. What do you say?
Yes.
All right, back from the break. So what I was going to say is that I'll get similar questions from clients and I guess a few emails of people that are at other points of the spectrum where they might be in the middle of wanting to have kids or not have kids, and they are asking similar questions that you were exploring yourself. And so, because I feel like this category of conversation is associated with the ultimate decision not to have kids. You have to sort of go on the hero's journey to emerge on the other side and say, I have decided not to have kids. Whereas to have kids, and traditionally can make it, or traditions and conventions can make it so that you don't have to go on a noticeable hero's journey to have kids, because it'll just happen. And hopefully for those folks, it coincides with an inner destiny or desire or compatibility with having kids. But people will go on this hero's journey and decide to have kids, maybe even start out with the assumption that they're not going to have kids. So there's a lot of different pathways. It's not just a liberation of realizing that you're not going to have kids. You have to ultimately go through a lot more enemies and villains to get to the decision not to have kids, to the resolution, because of society and because of the patriarchy and because of your parents and all this stuff, But, given today's landscape, there's a fair amount of people that truly do have, reasonably so, the flexibility to decide not to have kids. And with people getting married later and the access to birth control for, at least some of us, the ability to make that decision for the most part when you want to. And also with the people that I talk with about this, it's often like they're 35 and they always had this question mark. They always knew that they didn't want to in the immediate term, but they never said, I never want to have kids. And they're like, holy shit, I have a limited window of time to make this decision. and I don't know what to do yet, and there's so many consequences, and I have the choice, and it's a good thing that the choice is there, but it's a hero's journey, it's a whole exploration. And I'm wondering, with this book, could one conceivably in the end say, I want to have kids?
Oh yeah. So
it's not just a propaganda piece, or it's not leading you towards an end goal. It's just an open exploratory template to figure out things for yourself, and it doesn't seem to be biased in any way or the other.
Correct.
Okay. What's the name of the book again?
Okay. Motherhood, Is It For Me? Your Step-to-Step Guide to Clarity. By Ann David Vin and Denise Carlini.
Yeah. And, I've talked with clients about this, and it's given our awareness of the options and the consequences, it's a huge, whatever decision that we make along these lines, there are so many massive consequences. We don't have to say bad consequences, but, things that will occur once one makes that decision. And of course, we should also include, that when some people say, okay, I'm going to take the leap to have kids, sometimes there's infertility issues. And so it's not just like snapping your fingers, or you want to find a partner. It's like, oh shit, now I need to start actually settling down with someone, or finding someone that I want to be the other parent, and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, it's, people, I think rightfully so, have a lot of thoughts about like, well, okay, I've reached that point where I want to have kids, but God fucking knows. Because what if I find that it's not the sort of job you can try out for a couple years, You can be an aunt or a daycare person and get a glimpse, and that's a glimpse, but it's not really the full meal deal. And also, it's a decision that you make that has the longest term consequences. If you get married, you can get divorced. If you take a job, you can quit for the most part. If you have a kid, if you're a moral person, like, it's forever, till the day you die, you're a parent, and you have to do what it takes, even if later on you decide that you don't want to anymore. And there are options of adoption stuff, but obviously putting a kid up for adoption at age 10 is going to harm the child in all likelihood, And if people are realistic about it, they're like, okay, I'm making this choice, and I'm realistic enough to know that there's going to be some bad days, and I'm kind of rolling the dice about what sort of disposition the kid has and how we fit together and where I'm going to be. What if I come down with some kind of chronic fatigue 10 years from now? Like, what then? What risk am I taking? But I'm willing to do that. I think it's the right choice. We'll see what happens, and so the decision, whichever way people go with it, for all of us, regardless of gender, is huge. And in the past, it was so much easier, and that's why people welcome the patriarchy sometimes, because it just eliminates that confusion and that decision and the self-blame if it doesn't work out. It's just like, just tell me what to do, universe. Tell me what to do, power structure, because I don't know what to do. It's too much to bear. But anyway, I just want to recognize that this hero's journey can end in a variety of different ends. Sometimes you end up on Tatooine, and sometimes you end up on Alderaan, and sometimes you end up on Coruscant. You don't know where you're going to end up, but you got to start the journey, because otherwise nothing will ever happen.
Yeah.
Are you surprised that I knew 3 planets in the Star Wars universe?
I wasn't expecting that, but then I looked up and I'm like, I should have been expecting that.
Yeah.
I'm looking at
my
Lego.
Star Wars Legos above my head.
Because I was a Hobbit. I was like a Lord of the Rings kid. So to see the Hobbit up there, that's my hero's journey.
And Bilbo.
There it is.
That Bilbo guy.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. So then you started to pull back on the internal justifications. What was that like?
Well, I didn't have those. That wasn't part of my cycle anymore. Or if it was, that deep longing that I had felt, it petered off really, really quickly. just because of the insight. But you're talking about like the more like extreme justification for like the planet's dying, no more kids. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, that just didn't feel as relevant anymore. And I so much so that I don't really have a good memory around it. It just faded.
But it's kind of weird because it's scientific fact that humans are bad for this planet and for all the other animals and for the sustainability. I mean, we could literally be heading down a road of complete annihilation of all species on this planet.
But I'm also a realist, so like, what are we gonna do? Like, just not have kids?
Well, you know,
No.
but in one's mind, one could still hold on to a way of seeing things, a hope.
I could have.
But you've changed, so because it or have you?
I have.
Okay.
I absolutely have. Yeah. I think just how powerful that vision was and how much it resonated with me. I know that there's people out there that have done the hero's journey that you're talking about and come out with a different answer than me. And I would really hope that they would have the resources and ability to live their life in a way that is in accordance with what they had learned to be the right way to go, you know, just like I had.
So in the past, when you were more extreme, you would have thought everyone's deluding themselves.
Yeah, like don't you care about the planet? Like stuff like that.
You're just following a script.
Yeah, like us humans think that we're so great. Yeah, following a script.
It's narcissistic to have kids because you just want to have a little you, but it's not a little you.
Right. It's a whole, totally those type of thoughts were going through my head. And then, as I came into my later 20s and early 30s, it was just like, just live your life, man.
So
I'm trying to live mine.
Yeah. And I think for me in this zone is there's a sustainable future with the human race as a part of that and with people having kids. And even with the theorized or predicted upper limit of our global population of, I think they think it's going to plateau at like 12 billion or something. I can't remember but it's not far off is the thing. And it plateaus because it's predicted to plateau because when you graph the various economies and societies around the world, there is a very clear trend that as societies become more economically better off and you have education and you have freedoms for women and you have children living longer, less likely to die, and you strip away the fundamentalist religion stranglehold on certain societies, then everyone, women included, choose to have a number of children on average that ends up just sustaining the population. And there's all these ideas about like how if that happens, then economies actually depend on growth. And, we could go down all that kind of road. And, there's ways around that in the future with government policy and economic policy. But we might see a decrease too, because that's another thing that you see is that past a certain point, you actually have societies that are doing well and have been doing well for a long time and don't have fundamentalist religions like Japan, for example. They actually are experiencing a decrease in population. And there are, these consequences to the economy. You don't have people to work. And you need to actually start opening your borders and start letting people in to actually bolster the economy and that kind of stuff,
Because the answer cannot be try to get people that don't want to have kids to have kids, because that's just going to keep me and you in a job.
Yeah.
In ways that like...
Yeah. So, we've highlighted that to have kids is to take some risks and to inherently invite some struggles and frustrations. We should also highlight the glory and the wonderfulness and the magic of the love there and the seeing the world through the child's eyes and to shepherd this human into safety and enjoyment and fun and learning and experience. to have that relationship for the rest of your life, it's wonderful. But for someone to make a choice to say, okay, no kids, what are the perils that are in all likelihood going to happen or have happened?
To say that I don't want kids?
Yeah, because, to both decisions, there's perils. There's inherent perils to either side.
Let me think about that, because, we've already named one, right? The question of what are you going to do when you're older? Classic.
Which I don't really understand. Maybe because I'm not there yet, but I don't really get that one. Honestly.
I don't get that one either. Yeah. It's never.
But I don't think it's automatic that even if you had kids, that they actually would be materially involved in taking care of you when you're older. Certainly in some. And
some
albeit
cultures,
better cultures than America, but in Seattle, like the people that I know, I don't think it's even the parents don't assume that they don't even want to burden their kids with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So there's different points of view, but what are the perils like ongoing? Like month to month kind of downsides.
Not much, man. Not much. I'm afraid I'm going to come off as like so smug or something, but like I think all the time, honestly, like it's me and my cats and whoever I let into my life besides that, and it's really good. Mm-hmm. Like I've never had that longing of like, oh, I really wish a kid was here to see this. So as far as perils go, maybe I'm just not the right person to ask that because I haven't experienced any.
No, I didn't know what the answer would be to that question, honestly. I hadn't really ever thought about it before. I suppose just the blanket peril of missing out.
Missing out?
Right. Missing out on...
But that's not real to me.
Yeah. Well, I assume that if you had kids, for whatever reason, that you would really enjoy moments and enjoy the whole overall process, right?
I would try. For my kids,
yeah,
I would try. I would give them everything that I could.
I'm not trying to find negativity here, but I think that's by definition there is a benefit to having kids that's really big and profound and all-encompassing. And at the very least, there are moments of wonderfulness and the connection
beautiful.
and the beauty of it. And that is given up. Now, for you, I think what you're saying is, I don't think I would enjoy it that much. And also, I love my life as it is. And I'm not really missing out on anything. I don't really feel the deficit.
I grew up in this culture, in this female body and like there are a lot of messages that came onto me, and so one of the pieces of this is vanity too. Like I have this whole relationship with and this involves health too, because I've also had like really poor health too, so I'm very protective of my
I don't know, did you want to talk about that at all?
I'll mention that just like my flesh suit has been very in need of maintenance, and I don't know what it would even do going through a pregnancy. And like all of my friends that have had children have had postpartum depression afterwards, and
it's really common, and also so postpartum anxiety disorders actually is, I think, even more common. Yeah, that doesn't get talked about, like postpartum OCD or postpartum generalized anxiety or.
It feels to me, this is just my experience, like it's more common than not. Like in my circle, it's more common than that.
It's very common. Yeah. It's very common, and
I was taught that once you have a baby,
can be rough. Like
you want to die, or you want to kill the baby,
right.
or you want to run away. Like you can go. It can get so dark, and it's like not their. It's not anybody's fault. It's just your hormones.
Yeah, and there's so many things to talk about in this realm. For someone who's never been depressed, if someone's had depression in the past and then they have a bout of it postpartum, there's at least some knowledge in all likelihood for them that they're like, oh, this is depression, I know what to do. If you've never experienced it before, it can be a lot worse, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not accustomed to questioning those kinds of things or telling other people, and
no one prepares anybody, as far as I can
No.
I've heard for postpartum depression, or
Right.
how horrible it can be.
Yeah.
Like I'm not gonna diminish the amazingness of like looking at your kiddo's face when you've just had them, and like how magical and spiritual that must be. But like we do need to start talking about how truly horrible some of those moments are, so that we can get people the medical care they need and the support they need.
Yeah.
Like
Mainly the support.
the support.
Yeah, because it's rough even if you don't have societal oppression, of course. But the message, particularly to mothers, is that particularly early parenting needs to look a certain way, and if it doesn't look that way, then you're broken as a human
You're
being.
a monster.
Mothers will feel like they're literally a monster, or they're a psychopath. They have no empathy or something.
Or like they're never going to be able to bond with their children, which is not the case.
Right.
I mean, usually not the case.
Right. So they need the support of not only people listening to them and saying it's okay. Let's look at this. Let's address it. Let's talk with the doctor. Let's maybe talk with a psychiatrist, a therapist. Let's talk about hormones. Let's talk about recovery. And we will, as a village, all be parenting this young child together so that the child doesn't suffer and you don't have to take on all the responsibilities. For some people, it could be argued that they have a really, if they were left to their own devices, they would have a really minor, very short-term depressive episode, but they enter into it, and then if there is another parent, their maternity leave might not even exist, and so they're back at work, and there's a single parent at home taking care of this kid, and they can't even get themselves to look at the kid, or they can't even get themselves out of bed, and there's already just all the stress and the lack of sleep and the medical recovery. And, people are calling and how you doing? And, oh, you must be beautiful. I'm so celebrating, and you're just like in this other world. And then you just downward spiral even more, you know what I mean? And it could be argued that a lot of the postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety is because of the lack of support and lack of normalization of it, lack of acknowledgement.
Made worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also so there's the mental health concerns, but also just I'm selfish with my body. I like to use it for what I like to use it for, and I like to look a certain way. And I've done a lot of healing around what your body is supposed to look like. And what's fucked is that when you have a baby, which is what the patriarchy says you're supposed to do, all of a sudden you have to start lessening the signs of the baby that you just had, lose your weight. Put on all the lotions to diminish your stretch marks, or and I'm not saying that it's like this for everybody. Some people live in communities where they just get to be humans, and everybody's fine with that, and that's the way I think it should be. But there are still that messaging out there that okay, you had a baby now,
get back to looking good so that men can look at you in an objectifying way.
Get back to looking like you haven't had a baby, but also on no sleep, but also when you literally have a child. It's that's bonkers.
Yeah.
To me. Yeah, but I think I'm trying to say this stuff because I want to validate every single reason why someone might not want to have a kid. And if it's because you, just want to have more money for your travels or something, I think that's a valid reason. If you just have never really had the experience or the long-term experience of wanting a child like me, I think that's really valid. Or, I've also got some reasons that some people might think are more valid. My 3-month-old brother died of SIDS, and I watched my stepmom go through that and went through it myself. And
are you talking about you, or are you talking about the hypothetical?
Oh, my literal brother, Tristan, died of SIDS at 3 months old.
Oh.
It really shook my family. And I think that if I cared more about how people evaluated me or might be analyzing me, people might say, well, your various traumas brought you to this point where you don't want to have kids. And like, even if that's true,
Yeah.
it is where I'm at.
Yeah. The other, I guess I should have brought this up in the beginning, which is that we tend to think about the decision or the choice or the life of having kids or not having kids to be this spiritual, black and white, inherent I've even said like destiny. That's one way of seeing it. But
for some people, it totally is, and that's
yeah,
awesome.
but it's not. But it is. It doesn't really play out that way. It's a similar. Like people will talk with me about this question and be like, what if I make the wrong choice? That's why I was kind of framing it of like, there's glory and there's perils to each, in the same way of who you marry or whether you decide to get married or what career you take. And, we have ways of narrativizing this, like, God set this path out before me, or this is my destiny, or what if I, to my life, it's like, what if I never met my wife? It feels almost sacrilegious to think of another life that would have been just as good or better, maybe. I don't know. Unlikely, but even just saying that out loud, it's just like, you're not supposed to say that. But of course, if I looked at someone else's life, I would say, yeah, well, objectively, it's possible that you would have been better off. You like your spouse, but there's another life that if there was some way of quantifying happiness or something, that you would have been better off with someone else. There's just no way to know, because everything's kind of random, and we only have one life to live, and we can only make the choices we make. As an analogy to this that people might be able to relate to is how you decide how many kids you have. If you have the choice, that decision usually isn't as struggled around. I mean, you can struggle with it, but it's not as struggled as whether or not to have kids or not. And so if you have, say, 2 kids, and you're trying to make that choice between you and your spouse of, should we have more kids? Because often in mainstream Seattle culture anyway, people will say, well, while you're down there, how about you tie the tubes? You know what I mean? Or, okay, partner of mine, we've had our second child. It's time to snip the nuts. You know what I mean? And just so I don't have to take hormones anymore, something like that. And how do you make that choice? Well, there's glory and peril to either choice. If you have another kid, you are, you're like, that human being can exist. And if I make this choice, that human being will not come into existence. And I'm going to miss out on all of and my kids will miss out on that relationship with that other sibling. Oh my God, what do I choose? But people don't typically have the same kind of worries about, quote unquote, making the wrong choice. And I don't even think people typically see it that way. It's just like, look, I don't want to have another kid. This is enough, or whatever, but there's often a conversation there, And, you can make the wrong choice, and you can regret it. Like, oh, if only I had cut this off at 3 kids, like the 4th, it really pushed things over the edge. But my overall point is, if we zoom out and look at individual lives and individual choices, it's not a matter of destiny or predetermination. We all just make choices about our lives, about career, about kids, about marriage, about where we live, about all these things. And we're all just trying to make the most of this time on this plane. And asking the question is sort of a FOMO question, if you will, of like, well, what if I choose wrong and I don't go to that party and everyone has a great time and I missed out on it? Like, it's not this binary thing. I don't know if I'm explaining it right. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I really do. Well, and I don't know if this is how your brain would say it, but what my brain's going to take from what you're saying and turn it into is, nothing is going to guarantee us happiness, except for, there's some things that we need that people deserve to have, that we hope everybody gets, that really can change, like turn your life around or like help you be okay. But like, whether you have a child or not, you're still going to be living every single day with whatever that choice is, and you get your struggles and your trials and your beauty and your moments, like no matter what life you choose. I don't know, this is okay, maybe that's not what you're saying, but
I mean, maybe people are understanding, because it's hard to put into words. if I were to summarize it, I would just say again that it's probably a more viable way of looking at our life and our decisions, as there are many paths that are happy ones or happy enough. And I know there are philosophers that have mulled this over, and I'm forgetting who they are and all their sort of rhetoric, but it's just up to us to make billions of choices along those lines and choose a path. If we get bogged down in FOMO and considering all of like what we're missing out on, and like what if we make the wrong choice and we overemphasize that, we'll just be ground to a halt and miss out on the inherent uncertainty and glory of life's choices. And like, say you have someone, if there is such a thing, who is like, say, 65% meant to have kids or something like that. Like, you run the experiment and the simulation 100 times, and the individual decides to have kids 65 of those times, and a majority of those 65 end up rating their life to be better than the 35 that decided not to have kids or something like that. I don't know where that went, but that was just how I said it in my mind. But anyway, so this is a person that if you were some omnipotent creature would actually try to give the message to them and say, you might want to actually consider having kids. And let's say they don't have kids. Well, it doesn't mean that their life was a waste or that they can't be very, very happy and have meaning, or have a different meaning, have a different path, have this other a version of glory. And also, is life about optimization? Because that's the other kind of thing that I think is a contemporary notion of just like, how do I game the system? How do I hack the system? How do I optimize my life, right? How do I optimize my body and my health and my hormones and my hair and my time and my investments and my internet and my car and my carpet and my, like everything has to be optimize. I have to like really just, I have to have like all the supplements, and I have to have the right friends, and I have to be tapped into the right marketers selling the right clothes with the right everything. And I think that's a particularly contemporary thing because of the choices and all the things that are, messaged to us around, like, you don't want to make a mistake with this one, I think that, and I'm not the first person to say this, but I think it can obviously cause a lot of suffering if you get sort of bogged down on kid FOMO.
Yeah. Agreed. I think when I am like feeling like I'm actually living my life and not getting bogged down by FOMO of any sort, it's just in those tiny little moments where you're just mindful and aware, or like, and you can bring it on in an instant, like even as you were talking, I was like, becoming present to like, oh, I'm with my mentor.
Yeah,
like,
you become more mindful of like, oh, let's get out of the future tripping.
Yeah, like
and the regret or whatever, and
that's living to me. And I'm not saying that people are not going to have to go through grief but grief I think is different than getting bogged down in FOMO.
That's the other thing I wanted to say was we all, I'll talk with people. They'll be like, what if I don't have kids and I'm 65 and I'm just like beating myself up about not having kids? That does happen, but it's very rare. Not to say that not having kids is the way to go, but it's very rare that research shows, and anecdote, that when, of all the random decisions that people have made and they've tried to figure out, and they've been pigeonholed of having kids or not having kids, and they end up, looking back on their life when they're older, it's extremely rare that someone will say, oh, I should have done it differently. My life is meaningless. Might someone say, oh, like, I wish I didn't have that fourth kid. It would have been, I think, better for everybody if I didn't. But I'm not sitting here every second of the day regretting it. I'm moving forward and I'm figuring shit out. Or, oh my God, I should have had kids. Because the thing about, and this is related to that sort of essence or destiny thing, is like, if you don't have kids, it doesn't make you a different sort of human. You're still able to live and get similar kinds of experiences. Like if we sort of break it down into like what needs are being met and what experiences generally speaking, one has when one does have kids. You can legit have a lot of those experiences with cats, with dogs, with nieces and nephews, with clients, with students, with podcast listeners, with yourself, right? With plants, also spouses, the connection and the love and the eye contact, or with your own parents. Like there's, it's not having kids has a lot of uniqueness to it, of course, and a lot of specificity. So if you decide to not have kids and you're like, oh, what if I'm missing out on stuff? 99% of what, generally speaking, you can get out of having kids, you can actually find in other ways that don't require you to make that choice in that moment, and vice versa. Yeah. If someone's like, what if I miss out on travel and having that freedom? Well, the same thing. Yeah, it's a sacrifice, and think about it and go on the hero's journey and figure it out. But at the end of the journey, you're not determining one's destiny. You're just like, when I contemplate all of the things, I want this path and I am taking responsibility for that choice. And I'm pretty sure that's what's meant for me. And I'll figure it out as I go. Stacy and I just went on a road trip, and we were both kind of worrying about like, oh, what if we forget something? And then we both just reminded ourselves, we're doing a road trip in the United States. We can buy shit. If we forgot a toothbrush, there are stores along the way where we can buy a toothbrush, or we can literally just drive back home and get it. You know what I mean?
We have the technology.
Right. It's the same when it comes to these two paths. If you get, you're 45 and you don't have kids, and you're just like, oh, there's something missing. There's paths that don't involve reversing time and having kids to getting needs met. The other thing I'll say is, you were referencing, I don't know if you did this in your head, but, and if you did, this is just another example, because I remember telling you a long time ago that you think like me and I think like you. Did you remember me saying this to you? I can tell that we have a similar mind.
I will take that compliment.
I swear to God, we talked about this.
I'm going to take
many
that to
years
my
ago.
grave.
I
needed the reminder, and I'll take it. Thank you.
Because I can tell, like but maybe this will be all kind of dashed on the rocks if you say no. That's not what I was saying.
Let's see. Let's go for it.
Yeah, but you were saying, yeah, my brother died of SIDS, and then you quickly followed up with, and I think people might think that I'm choosing not to have kids because of trauma, because you were thinking that by disclosing that maybe even you question yourself, or other people would be like, oh, she's just not having kids because she went through that trauma as a kid. So was that what you were thinking?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are the same. No, just joking. No, I remember telling you that your clinical instincts were similar to me, that I understood you when you would talk about your clients and the decisions and the way you saw things. I was like, oh, that's very familiar to me. Do you remember me telling you that?
Again, horrible memory, but now
I remember
I've got
telling
it
you.
locked in.
I know I told you that. I feel like I even remember
you.
where you were sitting and when I was telling you. But anyway, so along those lines, that people will say is just like, oh, she doesn't want to have kids because she comes from a divorced, or she doesn't want to get married because she comes from a broken family, or she doesn't want to have kids because her brother died of SIDS, or she doesn't want to have kids because she grew up in an evangelical, or whatever sort of the thing is. And of course it's demeaning to just reduce people to that, and to only consider people making a totally viable life choice as being the result of trauma, and not say that to have kids might be the result of trauma as well. You know what I mean? Like, you could easily say, oh, you grew up a single kid, so you want to have kids because you were lonely as a kid, or whatever. It's reductive, it's demeaning, it's pigeonholing. But the other side of it is that who cares? I think that's what you're saying.
That's what I was saying. Yeah.
Who cares if those life experiences, negative and positive, influenced me? I am the product of my life, and maybe my brother dying of SIDS is an influence. It certainly isn't like the only thing, because plenty of people have experienced brothers dying of SIDS and went on to have kids. So it's not just that. But, it is a similar thing when people get into S&M and were sexually abused.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's a very, I resonate with that parallel. Yeah,
it's like
and
fine. It's okay that
that's
it's
okay.
connected. It's not destructive. If you believe BDSM is pathological, if you believe that not having kids is pathological, then I guess you're going to see it as
Then
a
you're gonna filter
you're going
it
to see
that
it as a
way.
symptom. But if you see it as just another life choice, then our life experiences, sure, they put us on a journey, I guess.
And it's about the kid. It's about the hypothetical kid. Like if if someone were to, I guess, hear this and be like, oh, that person went through so much, and like if they were only more farther along on their healing journey, they might, I'm pretty sure Jesamie would want kids. That would not guarantee that that would not be the fix. Me having kids would not be that would not make it a good option for that like hypothetical child that was supposed to come in. Like, so even if it was true, practically, I really, really am a fan of parents, of people who want children and feel able to do it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and I am not, for whatever reason. I am not.
Just a sort of final question. If, say, the brother didn't die of SIDS, and say that you had 3 younger siblings who you loved and had all the normal ups and downs with, and it's interesting because, you went into marriage and family therapy, and you did work with kids in your internship. No?
I did.
Yeah.
But I was bad at it.
Okay.
And I hope those kids are doing okay. And
because that would have been the first time, and only time, from my understanding now, that you had like close contact, ongoing contact with kids. Yeah,
because even growing up, I was mostly hanging out with adults. I mean, I had some friends, but I don't know. Humans were always just sort of like, humans, especially my age, were just hard to understand. And so I get what's going on in my brain. I don't know what's going on with all y'all. So yeah, that was my first real exposure to like time with kiddos. And
you went into marriage and family therapy because you wanted to work with couples.
I wanted to work with couples. Yeah, I wanted to work with relationships.
Yeah. And that is sort of that is a decision that I will, and that's another one of those choices, like, oh, what do I choose in terms of my career? Or do I go marriage and family therapy? Do I go counseling? Do I, and it's like, well, there's flexibility and all, and you'll figure, anyway, but that decision, and, I might have even talked with you at open house about this decision. I don't know. And I might have said something like, do you want to work with kids? And people would say, well, not really. I want to work with couples. And I would say, well, then if you want to really work with couples, I would recommend marriage and family therapy. You might have to work with kids at your internship, but that's a brief stint, and you'll figure it out, and maybe you'll like it, and maybe you'll find that it's not for you. And post-grad, you can just decide that you'll never work with kids again. Plenty of people will do that.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like that's what you did.
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah. Did I talk with you at open house about it?
Not that I remember. It was so long ago.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's what you did. And in that experience, does that have any influence on this? Like working with the kid clients 10 years ago?
I think just feeling so bad at working with kids and just being like, wow, I should not be working with children. I don't understand them. I don't even remember what it's like to be a child in lots of these cases.
It's interesting because I think we talked about this back then. Like, kids respond to you.
Do they? I mean, kids want to hang out with me, but I think that's only because I treat them and listen. Like, I treat them like humans.
But you have a vibe that I could imagine they would interpret as inviting.
I do tend to be well liked by children in my circles. Yeah, for sure. And I do actively try to work on ageism and try to like show up for them like I would any other person of any other age. So I think that is hopefully.
It's just interesting, and it's totally. I don't think I knew that. I don't think I knew this whole background when you were working with kids back then, because I think we would have talked about this more explicitly back then.
Yeah, I was just like, I should have known so much more about like what to do at certain developmental stages. Like I think that I actually caused harm. I know for one instance I absolutely caused harm because I was helping a kid through a medical procedure like prep, and I just traumatized him.
How?
Well, I looked up on the internet, like when a kid is this age and they're this anxious about this procedure, how should I go about helping them? And the internet, maybe it was like Psychology Today-esque type of thing, was like, we'll go through the procedure and tell them like mom's going to be there on the other side. And so I did the thing, and the kid was just so freaked out and like stopped seeing me. And I was just like, yeah, I would definitely, that was definitely the right choice to like go to a different therapist.
Well, I wouldn't attribute that to lack of familiarity with kids. I would just say you made a call.
And it was the wrong one for this child.
But and you know, we could rewind the clock and go into those details, but I'm guessing, given your description, and I'm guessing since you're a totally experienced therapist now looking back, that you can say, well, it wasn't the wrong choice. It was a choice, and it had its merits, and it was reasonable to predict that could have helped. It just didn't go over well. Or the one part that you could potentially point to is that you weren't familiar enough with the signals from children that they're uncomfortable, and as you were going into it, you weren't picking up on it just because you just haven't hung out with kids enough.
Exactly. And then I would sometimes shadow Scarlett, who was doing play therapy, and that woman worked miracles. Like, it was so cool to watch her work. Mm-hmm. And so I just knew there was like a whole nother level of things that I could have studied and I didn't. Like I took Truce's class, which was so good, about like, it was a parent.
Yeah, it was a parenting course.
Yeah, parenting something.
Yeah. Jeez, I can't remember the course name, but yeah, it was about parenting.
It was so good.
Yeah.
But like, because I didn't choose to go down to like take advantage of the other classes that were about like childhood development or anything that has to do with children or parenting. Yeah. So you asked if internship might have influenced this part of me, and I think it did. I do think it did.
Yeah.
It obviously wasn't the deciding factor, but just feeling so, what is the word, inept around kids, and also at some points harmful to kids. I'm like, I can be around kids, although it is very overstimulating for me to be around kids, which is a different thing. But like, probably shouldn't be around them therapeutically because I lack the skill set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this reminds me of another question I'll get from emailers that they'll say that they've been traumatized and they are worried because they're very self-aware and differentiated and been through therapy, that even with their spouse, they will be distorted and overreact, and they're predicting in a rational, intelligent way that their kids are going to trigger them and they're going to be distorted and they're going to overreact to their kids. And they are terrified that they're going to perpetuate the trauma tree, if you will. And they don't know, and they want to have kids, but they're worried, or they're on the fence about kids or something. You know, that can be another part of the exploration, a part of that hero's journey. The very short answer I'll say to it is that every parent fucks up their kids. It's just a matter of degree. And for people that have, and I'm not saying that to say that all parents are bad. I'm just saying that the best parent will have a bad day, a bad moment. Also, there are inherent conflicts in parenting that has no resolution, that you can emerge with the child going like, oh, that was non-damaging. You know, like when a kid has to go down for bedtime because you know that they're going to be cranky otherwise, and they have to leave the party, you know, either you let them stay and they get spoiled and they have a horrible day tomorrow because they're in a cranky mood, or you drag them literally kicking and screaming from the party, and you put them to bed and they say that they hate you, and they go through a period of time where they think that you are the enemy. Neither one of those answers are good, and there's so many parenting decisions they have to make. And so anyway, And so the other aspect of this is that people who have been traumatized and have recovered to some extent have a total leg up on parents that have never been traumatized and have never been forced or given the opportunity to face their demons, because for these individuals who have been recovered, they have the language, they have the knowledge, they have the ability. They'll make mistakes like everyone else, but they also, in my experience, have a superior way of approaching kids and their emotions, less shaming, more self-awareness, more apologies from parents in these situations. But it's a part of the hero's journey. And for some people, they might work it into their decision of just like, well, I'm on the fence and I go down this journey. And when I think about my reactivity and also just kind of the bad mood that triggering puts me in, I kind of need things to be pretty stable, and kids would just add this element of chaos. And although I really want to have kids, I just think like overall it's just better that I don't, there's a lot of journeys. So I just want to add that trauma aspect to it as not, there's a lot of aspects to it is the point. But it's funny, Jesamie, when we were almost starting to record, you're like, well, because I forgot what we were going to talk about. and you were like, well, I want to talk about, not having kids. And I was like, oh, okay. And you're like, yeah, you said, I don't really have much to say. So the episode will probably only be like 5 minutes long.
I'm like, I can make this really quick for you.
Yeah. And it's 2 hours plus in.
Oh my God.
So apparently
I had some thoughts.
There's a lot more to say. Well, it's mostly me, honestly, but also, it's worthy of, and I think, I'm sure the listeners are like, oh my God, this is a mind-blowing episode hearing Jesamie talk about this. Honestly.
Oh, I thought you were being sarcastic.
No, because this doesn't get talked about very often. And even if it does, it's usually just the surface of just like anti-stigma, which is great. But the way that you described the process and the depth and the integration of all things, and just also the human interest story of emerging out of evangelicalism and just hearing about that, is pretty fascinating, really.
Thanks.
And mind blowing is a good word for it, because the kinds of things that you're talking about being one with the universe, like it can feel
like literally having your mind blown.
Yeah,
to pieces.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's cool. I did want you to I don't know. I did want you to know this about me, even though
I'm glad
it doesn't it's not going to affect any of our lives. Just I want to be known.
Most of my favorite things have no concrete benefit to it.
There you go.
Like a Cheeto. There's no concrete benefit to a Cheeto. It's funny. I'm reminded of how great your laugh is and how much we would laugh together. You, me, and Aaron, and Christy, and the others. Just all the laughter.
And the crying, so much crying.
and the fighting. When we were talking about your journey of Christianity, we had a whole thing between you and another student.
Oh, I got so mad at him.
Yeah. Because he's atheist, and he was then. I assume he still is now. And I was facilitating, and it was a small class. It was like 5-6 students.
And we were really good friends at that point too. Yeah. So we were.
And you were literally across the table from each other.
As polite as we probably could have been if we hadn't known each other. I mean, we were polite, but
there was some feelings, and he was, at least on the surface, more sure of his argument, and I think you were too, but I think you were hurt more by it.
Yeah, you're right. It probably wasn't so much anger. I was so hurt. I felt like he didn't, at that moment, I felt like he didn't think I was very smart.
Right. And he had that, and he's not here to defend himself, but he had that, and I must have at least given a vibe of this, because I have sympathy for Christians and think that you can be Christian and be obviously a good person
Absolutely.
and not a ridiculous human being, you know? And so when you were, and you weren't telling him to be Christian.
No.
You were just talking about your position on something. And there's a common atheist discourse similar to what you were saying earlier when you were, because as an atheist, you're just blasted and attacked, and there's all these straw men that are presented, and you have to fight back, and eventually, I think for a lot of atheists, they just take this position of just like, well, fuck you, your religion is stupid, it's just ridiculous, you're deluding yourself. And they didn't start like that, but they ended there, or they eventually get to that point because of the attacks. He wasn't that far, but he was kind of presenting that side of things, and I remember like trying to help the conversation. I wasn't trying to end the conflict or anything, but I remember feeling like I was trying to protect you a little bit.
I felt that from you. What I felt from him was that we had a good friendship, and I felt a lot of respect from him, and just in general. And I think that to have me be someone that he was friends with, but also was a Christian, I think he was really frustrated with that. That's the sense I got. I don't know. I could ask him. I probably will. But I think he was really frustrated because this is something he, at that time in his life at least, did not respect. He thought it was so silly. And so to have me, someone that he wanted to be friends with and wanted to be close to, it just like, he just didn't like that for me. Mm-hmm. And we had, I don't remember them well, but we had conversations after that where we referenced that time in class, and we were able to be like, yeah, what was going on for you and me, and like, mm-hmm. It was fine. But
and there are people that are atheists who have been harmed by religion and have a bone to pick, viably so.
He was really happy though when I told him that I was no longer a Christian.
Oh really?
He was very pleased.
That's funny.
And it did bring us closer, and that's great.
That's funny. Yeah. I wonder if he secretly thinks that he won the battle.
I'm so glad he did.
Yeah.
For me, again, this is just like having kids. I hope everybody follows the life that is authentic to them. That's really all I care about for people. And it just turns out that wasn't. It was causing me much more harm than good. So just like having a child would.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes when I observe Christian groups or religious groups that have these kind of mechanisms, like the threat of hell, the mechanism is to control and to keep you from veering away from the religion. It's in your head, and it's eternal damnation, and there's a lot at stake. And so, and now you need us as the religious hierarchy to grant you passage into heaven and stuff. And so these kind of mechanisms are very effective at keeping people religious, but as soon as the veil is lifted and someone has a glimpse of the matrix, it is an instant turnoff. And with education and progression in our society, it dictates that the next generation and generations to come will just continue to see the farce and continue to reject it because it's such a negative, harmful, oppressive, just abusive way of conceiving the world. And one of the questions that a lot of people will say is, so if God is all about love, why would he do this to people? That it just, if that's God, then I don't want to be a part of that. If God is willing to, because in some religious groups, they'll say that a 10-year-old that hasn't been baptized, if he learned about Jesus, if he heard about Jesus and decided to stay Jewish or a Muslim or whatever, then he's eternal damnation. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I want to tell these groups, it's like, if you want to last, you want to start to shed these mechanisms that were added on, or just look at the overall messaging that you're having. Like when I was growing up, the concept of hell was talked about, but it wasn't emphasized. I didn't grow up being afraid of going to hell. Just put it that way.
Nice.
I didn't grow up thinking about hell. I grew up thinking that Jesus loved me no matter what. You know what I mean? And I could really just be myself. And that, it was all about Jesus loves me. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. Anyway, it wasn't,
you skipped the part that had to do with kids. No, I'm just kidding.
If you think about sex, you're going to hell forever. You are damned.
I don't even think about it.
Yeah. But there are people like that where they literally will have that kind of rigid rule of just like, if you think about sin, like sex or something,
you've done it,
and you aren't forgiven by the time you die, eternal damnation, burning in hell for infinity. And to an adult, it's like hopefully they can sort of manage that. It's still hard, but for a 6-year-old, for crying out loud, my God,
it is too much. It was way too much. It was traumatizing. And I, being someone who didn't grow up with a dad, leaned so heavily into religion for dad, like God dad. And so it was a really terrifying, like, back and forth for me, because I had this really like strong belief and love for God, the Father, and then just like, having to hold at the same time that like he could drop me at any time. At any time, because I did something a little bit bad, because I wasn't as perfect as Jesus. And then they would say, okay, but Jesus's blood covers all of your sin. But it's like, how do you, as a very rule following kid, remember every single thing you've done and repent for it? Like, I'm sinning, like, according to the Bible, or according to maybe not the Bible, but like according to doctrine, was sinning like every 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Like, and also developmentally, children need to be sinning. You know what I mean? Like disobeying parents.
Well, there's
like
enough
pushing boundaries, having ego.
Yeah, there's enough problems with development anyway.
Yeah.
You add this to it. Like
it's too much.
Yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of these parents that are telling their 6-year-old this sort of stuff, if you ask them, what would you think if a 6-year-old was to watch a rated R horror movie? They would be like, oh no, you can't. That's abusive. You can't have them watch that. It's too much for them. It's worse what you're doing to this child. At least people understand the movie is fictional and it's not happening to them. But you're telling them a reality that is more horrific. I mean, there's nothing more horrific than eternal damnation in hell. I mean, that is by far the pinnacle of horror.
Yes.
And fear and terror. So it's just weird. Yeah.
It is weird.
If you believe in hell out there, if you're one of the people that do, what I recommend is, wait until your child is 18 or 25 before you start introducing these ideas, because it's too much for kids. Way too much. It's too much for anyone, but it's really too much for kids. Even if you aren't the one that is telling the kids, if the church is and the kids picking it up, like, it's still getting in there, and it's terrifying.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Very much so.
Well, Jesamie, our 5 minutes of discussion is over, and we don't have anything more to talk about. So let's just wrap it up here.
Yeah, we pretty much covered it.
Yeah. So if people want to find you, do you want to put that out there?
Yeah, I have a really long, convoluted URL. If people want to find me, would we be able to put that into a link for them?
Yeah, send that to me. But how could they Google you?
You could. I think there's a lot of, I go professionally by Jess. So it would be Jess Flynn Therapy, or maybe Jess the Therapist. I haven't looked at my URL for a while, but
Jess Flynn Therapy.
I think that's it.
There can't be that many Jess Flynn therapists who are on the internet.
I mean, you'd be surprised.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if someone...
And you're licensed in Washington?
Washington, yeah. Only Washington, yeah.
Yeah. So if you look for the Washington therapist, Jess Flynn Therapy.
Yeah.
Red hair.
Red hair, that's the one. Yeah, especially if people want a therapist who, like, I work with people that are on both sides of this. I've had clients that like that do end up having children. I love supporting them in that journey, and then, you know, everything in between. So, well, I guess it's kind of binary. You either do or you don't. But
Well,
I love supporting people in that.
I could see a lot, because I've fielded a lot of emails of people that are trying to make this choice.
Yeah.
And I could see how people would really want a therapist that appreciated the journey, because you could find a lot of therapists that would have a pretty limited wisdom around all that's at stake regarding the journey and the exploration, right? At the very least, people would worry, like, maybe the therapist would stigmatize me in some ways, you know, as they sometimes will. But if they knew that you're out there, then they would say, well, you know, Jess seems to really know this kind of stuff. So, yeah. But you also specialize in polyamorous things and sexuality, right?
Yeah, polyamorous things and like stuff like that.
Couple
and
things.
Couple things.
Definitely not kids things. Don't bring your kids to Jess.
I wouldn't. No, I have better referrals for you for kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a lot of couples things.
Health struggles.
Chronic. Yeah, a lot of my clients come to me for like chronic illness stuff. Oh, affairs. Like if you need someone to help you with like infidelity recovery, that's my jam. Yeah, but yeah,
Religion
recovery. I'm learning also a lot about ritualized torture, but we should not get into that.
Okay.
Then right now, like, so there's some stuff around that. I think.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I love working with individuals too. Like, yeah, I do. Like,
Yeah, I mean, all this
towards
applies to
couple,
individual
but
work as well. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the show. JessFlynnTherapy.com, or I don't know what the URL is, but
Something like
thanks
that.
for coming on the show, Jess. It was great to see you again. Feels we haven't been apart.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
It feels like it hasn't been forever since I've seen you in person.
I love that. I was worried about that. But yeah, thank you for having me. This was a really cool conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because
You deserve it. You really, really do.